Ladies and gentlemen, damas y caballeros, thank you for joining us for another episode of All the Angles, the business of paddle podcast worldwide, powered by the Hexagon Cup. This week, our objective is to give you, our audience, unique insight into the conference and event space around the paddle industry, but also in its more macro sense, we look at where paddle fits into bigger conferences and bigger events around the business of racket sports and sports business more generally. I'm being joined this episode by Ben Nichols, who is the International Communications Lead at the high-profile and groundbreaking paddle team event, the Hexagon Cup. Thanks again, Ben, for joining. And we are fortunate enough to explore this area with two of the leading international conferences that cover paddles. First, we have Alex Ponsetti, the Managing Director of the Padel World Summit. Alex has a long history in paddle, having worked as a coach, a club founder, a circuit founder, he's consulting. So he's been in the industry for decades and launched the first edition of the Padel World Summit in Malaga earlier this year in 2024. Joining him is Robyn Duda from America, who launched the first edition of the RacquetX conference, which obviously allowed us to highlight paddle space in the US, but also internationally, and then look at where paddle fits in among other racket sports such as tennis, squash, and of course, pickleball. Thank you both for joining us. Before we get started, if you enjoy this episode or have benefited from previous ones, please like, share, subscribe. It helps. So without further ado, let's start with you, Alex. You started the Padel World Summit this year in Malaga, which is not the first conference or event that has purely focused on paddle, but it's definitely a very successful one. Full disclosure, I was there in Malaga and saw it with my own two eyes. Why do you feel like the time is now right for this proliferation of events, conferences, trade shows, focusing on just paddle? And why did you decide to put it in Malaga?
Well, first of all, Alex, thanks for inviting me. And hi, Ben and Robyn. It's a pleasure being with you here. Regarding paddle and the time, it's now, first of all, because all of you know that paddle now is at the moment that it's growing super fast in all countries worldwide. And it's now because it comes from a need from the industry, because the industry is growing and the companies and manufacturers are growing so fast and they need sometimes help to keep growing in a professional way. So paddle is growing, but it's a young sport, as all knows, and needs to establish some right starting points like tournaments, leagues, like clubs, like events, like managers. So all this stuff needs to be well established. So it's now because the industry needs help and paddle needs professional people to support them and to keep growing the right way. That's why we start doing the Padel World Summit, to help and promote paddle worldwide in the right way and the best professional way.
And why Malaga?
Well, the easiest way is like Malaga. It's super nice place with beach, with good weather, with
like,
good
why
food.
not?
So yeah, like why not Malaga? So it's one of the most amazing places in Spain. And of course, that was one reason, because as an international event, we were looking for a place that was attractive for people from the different countries, but also because Malaga is always really focused in sports, also in paddle. They support all sports, but they support paddle a lot. You know that they have two premier tournaments there. They have a lot of paddle tournaments and international sports events. So they support us from the very beginning. So we had a really good relation and partnership, and that's why we selected Malaga.
Yeah, Robyn, just to kind of the same question really for you. So you came at it with a slightly different perspective because you wanted to bring the racket sports together, not just a single specific sport. So can you talk us through your vision with regards to RacquetX? And again, maybe a silly question, but why Miami?
Again, why not Miami?
Oh.
There is actually a reason beyond that, which I'll get to. But you know, for us and RacquetX, we saw a white space and a big opportunity to unite everyone. Pickleball is like the paddle of the rest of the world. It is, growing at rapid speeds here. It's all you hear about day in and day out. Tennis is obviously the legacy sport in the racket sport world, but squash just making it into the Olympics. And then, of course, paddle on the rise everywhere else in the world. And us seeing that trickle in, I think there's a lot of lessons. We saw it as a chance for everyone to come together to learn and grow, where we could be the home court for growth, whether you're a player or a maker. So it's a business event and a consumer event, which gives light to, and from a paddle perspective, in its early stages here in the US, but what can we learn from the other sports? What can we learn from each other? And even more importantly, what can we learn from the outside, from other sports, other industries who have either done things really well or made mistakes, so that there is nothing prohibiting the continued growth here. As for Miami, obviously, why not Miami? But paddle, it certainly is I would say the capital of paddle in the US right now. There's lots of clubs, many players. So for us to talk about all racket sports in a city, we thought that there was a great representation in Florida, which has some of the highest concentrations of courts in general, clubs and country clubs and racket clubs in the country. And then, of course, Miami being a destination, an exciting place to be in March.
Just to follow up, Robyn, well, firstly, I can understand why Miami and why Malaga, having been lucky enough to work with you both and spend time there. And actually, as I sit here today, I'm 50 miles from Malaga, thanks to Alex. I came on a family holiday here, but I digress. I guess, Robyn, just starting with you in terms of the message from RacquetX is such a positive one of racket sports all excuse the pun, playing ball together and actually all getting on and seeing the bigger benefit of every sport, every racket sport doing pretty well in society today. How would you say the first year went in terms of the discussions, the debates that were had? Was the reality, did it live up to, and did people see that vision that you had at the outset?
Yeah, whenever you're launching, it's discovery and you have to iterate, and you're going to throw things against the wall. They're going to work and they're not going to work. I think overall we hit and achieved our numbers. We had 2,000 people on site, which was amazing. In terms of the expectation, I love connecting people and I love stirring the pot. If you put the right ideas, the right businesses, and the right personalities and people in rooms together, magic happens, right? And from what I gather, the feedback that I've heard, and then of course what I saw on site, was that you had sports interacting with each other, people on our courts who have never been playing certain sports. In terms of debate, I think that there were some really interesting across racket sports sessions that got people to think. There was a lot of stuff happening at the show at the same time. We had multiple stages going, 9 courts that we activated as though they were like a conference room where there were demos and open plays, but also different kind of content from tech companies on them. So there was a lot of stuff happening. And when it came to our sessions, we've had a really interesting and robust amount of people watch all the content that they couldn't take in at the show afterward, which has been great. And we can actually see a lot of analytics on what people are interested in, what they're gravitating to. If we don't know our audiences, we don't pay attention to those analytics, we can't improve year over year. So expectations, I have very high expectations. I think they were met. I'd love to say that they were exceeded, but I think my bar is pretty high.
And Alex, just to follow on from that, obviously you've had a couple of months now, the dust settling on Malaga. It was a real kind of landmark event with the community coming together en masse for the first time, to be honest. How do you reflect on, what you saw back in May?
Well, really, it's similar as Robyn said. In fact, we have been discussing about that with Robyn because we are somehow on the same way. And it happened the same that we did a lot of things, but we did it wrong, but we have to figure out how to do it in a different way or better because it's the first edition and we have to learn a lot. So we are trying to learn and understand what to do it better because our challenge is to connect them all. As Robyn said, we want to connect people and to connect the right people and professional people. And we need to understand what they need to do it better. So my reflection is that it went really well because we connect a lot of people and the feedback from people, it's super good. And that made me happy because that was our goal, to connect the people there and create opportunities for everybody, not only for businessmen, but also for coaches and for other operators and other players. No, so that was amazing. And now it's like we are working so hard. This month is the worst month to work, but we are working, trying to do our best and trying to launch the next edition.
It's August over there. There's no way.
Yeah, but in Spain,
no way.
August, nobody works. So
I know,
we are doing
I
our
know.
best, and as soon as possible, we will try to launch the second edition to try to do it even better.
I think just to chime in, and not to speak for Alex by any means, but I think when you're launching an event, there's so much emotion that goes into from the organizer side of this and hoping that you're giving the industry that you're serving something that's really interesting to them. And in year one, when you're launching, I think we're trying to prove that there's a need for this, to validate our value propositions, that there's an appetite to come, to connect, to be a part of something like this. And once you've validated that, which I think we both did in our respective regions of the world, then if you can get the right people around you to help build even stronger moving forward, and that's when things get really, really exciting.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings us to a question about edition 2, right? You guys are both now deep into probably planning edition 2 of your respective events. Is there any kind of insight that you can share with us about how those who went to edition 1, what will be different? What will they see in edition 2 that they didn't see in edition 1? How are you expanding it? What are you adding to it? What's going to be different?
Well, Robyn has the dates already, so maybe you can start with that.
We got all kind of stuff. We didn't stop. There's no vacations in the US. So not to brag about it by any means. We all need one. Obviously bigger. We had a really big footprint and space that we knew that we could grow into, but the looks of it, we're going to max out the Miami Beach Convention Center space that we had. We're adding a 10th court at a minimum, which is squash, which is really going to be really exciting. And there's a possibility of a racquetball ad if we can get that to come to fruition. In terms of content, we're going to be launching a club summit. So while we had content for clubs, club owners, operators, etc., directors spread out throughout 3 days, we're going to be concentrating it on one day on Monday so that people can properly organize their schedules for meetings and then really be engaged with their peers during a dedicated amount of time. And obviously making that content bigger and better, more focused, and really tap into the needs of those owner operators. We're going to be doing a startup pitch competition on the floor and an investor forum that goes along with that. And then if the stars align and I could help it, there'll be some level of an all racket sport competition. I'd love to call it the RacquetX Games, but I'll definitely get sued for that. And I don't think I'll get the trademark, but you could imagine a racket Olympics type of competition, pro-am type of thing. We're working really hard, not to spoil the surprise, but if we could pull that off, I think that just embodies the entire essence of what we do, of bringing and uniting and celebrating in play and sport together. And then a couple other surprises trickled in that I'm not going to say.
And will you be engaging, because one of the highlights of the first edition is the fact that you had the pickleball event literally next door and you had the Miami Open just down the road. Is that looking at how they weave into each other and into RacquetX? That's also going to continue to be a theme for the second edition?
Yeah, that stays the same. We have a really strong collaboration and support from the Miami Open. So we'll be doing things there again, perhaps a little bit differently. That was one of our most shining moments, was on the delivery of some of that, although the match was amazing. And we will have a pickleball tournament directly next door to us this year, and hopefully some collaboration where some of the bigger matches are on the RacquetX court, but more to come. We'll go live with registration October 1st, and we'll have a very festival-like calendar of things that are going to be happening, exciting things that we can announce early on.
And Alex, from your side, the second edition, how is it going to be different from what we experienced in Malaga this year?
Well, we are defining that, so it's not closed yet because we did it in May, and now we're working on that. But the main goals that we want to achieve for this second edition is to connect people even better and trying to do some kind of events that help and do it easier to them to connect. So it's not only the Congress that went really well, it's not only the investor forum as well, it's more about connecting them in the closest way. So we are trying to figure out how to connect them better. And the leisure part, of course, it's a B2B event, and our event it's focused 100% B2B, but it's the leisure part. We want to put more effort there because people are there for work, but it's padel, so they want to enjoy and they want to have fun, and they are with their teammates, so they want to enjoy. And so we are putting more focus there. So it's business, but it's also having fun. And the only sad part that I think that Robyn will agree is that there is only one first time, and it already happened. So I'm sad for that. The first time will never happen again.
No, and year two is arguably, in my opinion, the hardest. Having done a little bit of this, there's some expectation from folks who have attended. I think year one, everyone's like, what is it? What is going to happen?
The tricky second album.
And then exactly. And you're only as good as your last event. So the thing about in live events is you have to continue to surprise and delight people, push the envelope, have different speakers, different topics, and little, like I said, surprises along the way that keep the expectations met year after year after year.
Yeah.
Well, you both sort of touched on it a bit there, but why, if you can put your finger in it, are these gatherings or events so important? Why do them in the first place? I mean, we hear about networking. We hear about, I think I particularly heard in Malaga at the summit, people saying, I've met so many people I've only seen on Zoom, and similar at RacquetX. I'm sure it's the first kind of gatherings in our industry really post-COVID, I suppose. But apart from that and seeing people in real life, what do you think of maybe start with Alex, why are they so important?
Well, it's important because people need to meet to grow their businesses, because as a newer sport, there are a lot of opportunities that nobody knows yet. But I try to be all time connected and being with a lot of people. And every time that I have a new meeting with someone, I find a new opportunity for new business. So that means that every time that you connect with someone new, you have a new opportunity. And for people that are in the business of paddle, they need that. It's not only to sell rackets, but it's not only to sell course or to offer services. It's much more than that. It's connect all people to find the way to do it bigger and more professional. That's why it's so important to be in events like this and meet them all in the same place. If not, it will grow, but not the same way.
And Robyn, what would you say? I mean, you've touched on kind of an element of fun, I think, with RacquetX, and an element of experience you've talked a lot about, but that's obviously part of it. But why the importance of these events?
I use those words because there's a psychological standpoint behind it. It's not just fun, it's connection. And we as humans, it's one of our basic needs is connection. And if we're always behind a screen and we're not meeting people, we're not out, we start to deteriorate. I think that many of us saw that during COVID, the need to actually be around people. I've always said in my career that you'll never replace the handshake. There will be things that come along like Zoom events and virtual events that can complement that, but you'll never replace what a handshake is and what that means. For me, it's a hug. I'm a hugger. But, as humans, there's a basic need for connection, validation, and purpose. And if you can create moments and experiences like I talk about that give people a sense of sharing, the ability to connect, but also value that I'm playing this for a reason. I love this for a reason. I'm in this business for a reason, and giving them an opportunity and a platform to elevate that part of themselves. That's where you really start to create moments that matter for people. It's not just about the fun. I think that's a layer that helps break down barriers to get people to warm up and an intro, but really at the heart of it, it's who we are as humans psychologically, that they need things like this. And if we can do it in a way that serves their growth, their businesses, their play, you really hit a home run.
One thing I wanted to touch on, one of the risks, or one of the downsides of having a first edition is that inevitably you get certain holdouts. You get certain stakeholders in the space who go, you know what? I'm going to give this one a miss. I'll watch, I'll talk to people, and I'll see if I want to get involved in the second version. And I think it's fair to say that both your events had certain holdouts who were playing that wait and see game. Have you had any feedback from those holdouts since the events, either directly or through people, and those holdouts have now decided that they're going to press the green button and that they're coming this second edition? Has there been a change in the outlook of those holdouts who skipped the first editions?
Yeah, depending on the area. In terms of exhibitors, for example, most of them say that they want to come back because, of course, it's too early to take decision from them because they have leads, but they didn't close a lot of deals yet. I didn't contact with them all yet, but they want to repeat because they create opportunities. Like paddle court manufacturers, they need to connect with new opportunities, with new clubs that will open soon, or even paddle racket manufacturers to find distributors or to find new clubs or events. So it's huge, the opportunities. So they will repeat them all, or most of them they will repeat. In terms of attendees, the same, because of course they create a lot of opportunities in the first edition, but in a year, in a sport like paddle, a lot of things happen. Every week, you are in the business, so every week there are new things happening. I love to be on this sport because every time that I open the newspaper and trying to find something about paddle, it's always something new and something different, and it's so funny. So in a year, you can imagine the things that will change. So for them in 1 year difference, they need to meet again. And as Robyn said, they need to see on eyes to eyes and speak, and that's super important. But to push them being there, you need to be creative, finding new ways to new topics to talk about, new kind of experiences. So they need different things. But I'm happy to say that most of them want to repeat, and a lot of people that couldn't attend the first edition, they want to attend the second.
Robyn, from your side?
Yeah, it's complicated with all racket sports. So we have a great group of people who want to come back, and it's really strong. I think there were a lot of folks who were like, we'll wait and see. In those conversations we're having, the doors are much more open than they were. Tennis has given us a run for our money, for sure. I'm not shy about it. And I kind of joke and call them out. They're very open to hearing things, but they've been a laggard. Just saying that they don't need a show like this to a certain extent. Certainly not everyone in tennis. We definitely had some really strong supporters, but the majority were just like, we have the Miami Open. What are you going to do for us? And I think they're missing a huge opportunity because pickleball is, it's everywhere, and paddle's coming in hot. I think that tennis will see a bigger presence from them this year, but it was really tough for us last year to kind of convince them that this was a show that they really need to be at and support for the brand of tennis, not just their personal brands, but the brand of tennis as a sport as well.
Maybe the odd intervention from Novak Djokovic might be helpful in that regard.
It might help. It might help.
I mean, kudos to you, Robyn, getting him to say that. So,
just a whole puppet over here.
So I don't know if Ben's got any other questions, but I've got one. Events are events. The big question is what happens between the events, right? So you both have events which happen once a year, but you want to remain front of mind. You want people to continue to be aware of your event, to engage with your event, to learn from what your event has done. So what have you done, or what will you be doing to ensure your event continues to be top of mind and part of the conversation, part of the evolution of these sports in between your stops? How do you keep the event alive between the actual tentpole gatherings?
Well, one of the most important, of course, is socials, because people are looking for that all the time. But also in the press media, that's super important to be there, but not talking about summit, but talking about industry. So I think that, of course, we need people attending and we need people exhibiting, because this is the business. But I think it's more than that. It's about helping this sport. So we need to be there in all press, we need to be in socials, we need to create some webinars and be on podcasts like this. So for me now, my job right now is not only preparing the next edition, but also being almost everywhere, because talking about this is what people need. And I think that there's another super important part, that is that the brands has to be aware of that. If they are aware and they explain to the rest, because for the first edition was a thing that was best was that the brands, the same exhibitors, support us a lot, so they made part of the promotion. So I think that's very important, that the brands has to love this project, because it's for them. It's not for us, it's for them, this project. So they need to understand that they need to promote on their socials, on their connections, everywhere, that these events like RacquetX or the Summit are the places to meet and close deals and to create opportunities. So it's not only us, Robyn and I, it's not only the team, it's not only the community managers, but it's the industry that needs to understand that these events are one of the most important parts for the growth of these sports. So they need to understand that it's made for them, not for us.
Actually, that kind of brings me to my next question, which I think you touched on, but from both of your events respectively, who are the biggest group or vertical that attended? Who are the biggest group of businesses or stakeholders that attended your events? And maybe on the flip side, who are the people or the group that you really are focused on attracting or trying to attract the next year?
You mean visitors, not sponsors, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it could be either. Maybe it could be geography. Like we want to see people from a different geography really coming to this event. It's who's already well established and loads of people from that sector or geography come, and which sector you really want to make sure see the light and come to the second edition.
I mean, clubs were really strong for us last year and will be stronger across the board. We're forming some really great partnerships with folks across the board, not just individual racket clubs, but country clubs, et cetera, where those numbers were really strong. They're some of the strongest we've seen analytically on the content that we've put on the internet. So we want to serve that audience, hence the club summit that we're doing. And I think that audience will continue to grow for us. I think we're going to start to see more investors. We had a really great pool of folks, but again, there's so much investment opportunity in talk. I think people will start to see that grow. And I think that's an area for us that we want to consider. Seeing money being injected into an industry is obviously one of the key drivers of growth, and supporting that. We want to make sure that we can be a platform for that to continue, so that the new ideas, the startups, we see more tech launching in this space. I think it will also see a lot more coaches this year too, coaches and professionals. They're really a linchpin. And I know it's an area that we want to focus even stronger on, between player and the makers, if you will. So when your pro or your coach or the academy you're at or wherever you're at is telling you to buy a certain racket, to try this technology, this is what they're wearing. They're I don't want to say a micro influencer, but they're really integral in the buying process for both the B2B and the B2C side of things. And I think for us, that's really important to make sure that those folks are there seeing the latest and greatest, what's happening, and being in on that energy. A personal mission for me is I'd like to be able to figure out a way that we can get more Parks and Rec folks from a government standpoint. We grow by being inclusive and accessible as an industry. So making sure that we are able to serve those audiences so that they can continue to put courts in your municipalities, your cities, et cetera, is really important to our overall growth as an industry as well.
And you, Alex, what's the biggest bar chart in your attendees, and which is the one that you really want to see grow?
Yeah, in terms of attendees, the most was club owners. I think that it's the one that is most interested, and not only club owners, but potential club owners, people that are interested in launching a new padel club, and they were almost there. There is something really significant that we had attendees from 77 different countries, and maybe 20 of them was only one person that was attending, but that means something because we have 51 national federations in padel, and we had attendees from 77 different countries, and that means that a lot of people are interested in starting padel in their country, and that makes it super interesting. That's what makes us put a focus on these new countries, because in 1 year, maybe this 2024, they have 5 padel courses, but maybe in 1 year, they may have 100. And maybe in the second year, they have 2,000. This is how padel grows right now. You know, in UK, it's exactly like this. It's crazy. So the club owners is one of the main that we had. We also have a lot of investors. We have 50 different investors there, and the investor forum that was super interesting. Oh, and also padel academies. We had a lot of them. So for the next edition, we want to focus on all of them, but also to find more different perspectives, like Robyn said, like coaches, like other professionals, like physiotherapists, like all these other professionals. But I'm sure that group owners, potential group owners, and investors are the main focus, because are the ones that can connect better with the exhibitors and can learn from the Congress. That is what they are interested in.
I think just a final quick question from my side. You're hosting events in hotspots for the sports you're covering, obviously Malaga and Miami, totally logical choices. I'm sure you get suggestions and people coming to you saying, how's about hosting one in my part of the world? What temptation is there to jump outside the comfort zone and take a Padel World Summit or a RacquetX to a non-traditional paddle or non-traditional racket sport territory? Obviously, the advantages of broadening the sport may be quicker. The disadvantages is probably more risk attached, probably less of a receptive market, but you're trying to bring in that market. So how much consideration do you give to that? Or is it too early in the lifespan of both events to do that?
Yeah, we're always looking at opportunity and where we're best serving our audience and our initiative. We don't get people at the show, you could have as many sponsors, you can have a zillion sponsors under the sun, but if we don't have the right folks there, so tapping into what their needs are is really important. I think for me, for a launch, Miami 2 years in a row, just to get our feet, just to get some level of stability of what our offering is, and not moving that in a second year helps a lot. Always open, to what 2026 might look like. And we would probably start planning that late this year, to be honest. That's the crazy thing about events. You're usually starting to talk about the next edition before the edition that you've had is actually even cited or traded. And then, if there's some people who may want to see some RacquetX in other regions of the world, and we'll cross that bridge when we're ready. But I think the core of us right now is we're focused on making sure that Miami 2025 is the best year yet.
Yeah. Of course, a lot of people came and said, hey, I want to do the summit, and we are open to listen opportunities. It's obvious that we need to listen to that. But I think that we first need to consolidate it and to create that credibility that we start creating on the first edition. So we need to establish, and then let's see what the wind goes. And if we find an opportunity and we think that it's a moment, we'll do that. But on the short time, that's not on our focus, but maybe in the future. I don't know.
Okay.
Right.
Well, I think that's a good place to stop this episode. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Robyn, for joining us and giving us your perspectives from RacquetX and Padel World Summit. From my part, I 100% agree. I think these gatherings of the industry, or the kind of the outer circle of the industry, is critical to share information, perspectives, lessons, ideas, opportunities, challenges, all of these things that are going to help every stakeholder avoid mistakes, grow better, and hopefully improve the coverage of these sports and the credibility of these sports. So thanks for the service that you're doing to our ecosystems. And I hope I'll be able to come to the next editions. But for now, thank you very much. And we'll cover the broader focus on non-endemic conferences with James Emmett on the second part of this episode. So thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us for the second half of this Events and Conferences episode. Joining me is James Emmett from the Leaders Summit, which is part of a larger leaders offering, which is itself part of a group of companies that include Sport Business Journal in the US, as well as Sport Techie. And Leaders Week, I think it's fair to say, is probably one of the biggest, if not one of the most influential industry-wide gatherings or summits in the world. Takes place towards the end of the year, October, November time in London. And pretty much anyone who's anyone in the sports industry, especially at the leadership level, they pretty much put this in their calendar right at the beginning of the year as somewhere that they need to be, somewhere where they need to be seen. So what I wanted to explore with you, James, you've obviously had many years experience in not just putting together the Leaders Summit and the agenda for that conference, but of course, Leaders, like all big events and conferences, has a lot of supporting content across its platform. So you're obviously pivotal in various workshops, smaller networking events, and the other Leaders events in different parts of the world. So you know what it takes for sports to break into those agendas and into those events. So let's start maybe a little bit in the past. The reality is, as exciting as Padel is to everyone within the industry and perhaps a few people on the outside of the industry, the reality is that pretty much until fairly recently, if not even today, it hasn't really registered on the radar of an event at your kind of level. Can you explain a little bit why that is, why there is that disconnect between the excitement and the buzz around Padel in the endemic space versus kind of perhaps lack of size and credibility in terms of where you're looking at it from a sports industry global wide lens?
Yeah, of course. And thank you very much, Alex, for having me on the show. Certainly, I can speak from a personal perspective and a little bit from a leader's perspective. So from a personal perspective, I've been playing Padel and have known about Padel for a good few years. I remember the first time I heard about Padel actually was at a Leaders event I'm going to say it was probably 4 or 5 years ago. And it was the Spanish guys we have kind of people come from all over the world to our flagship event in London, where we have a few thousand people join us every October. And I remember talking to a couple of the guys from La Liga. In fact, it wasn't even a Spanish guy from La Liga. It was Joris Evers, if you remember him. He used to run communications for La Liga. He's a Dutch guy who was over in Spain for many years. And I think I was asking him whether he was going to go to some kind of private networking thing after the program. And he said no, because he's going to go and play something called Padel with one of the Argentinian delegates. And I thought, God, these funny old Spanish folks, they've got some odd habits, haven't they? But since then, I've got to know the sport and watched with admiration as it has exploded. And I first started playing myself in the Middle East. So it seems to me that there are two kind of hubs in its genesis anyway, which is kind of Spain and Qatar, the Middle East in general. I started playing in Qatar. We used to do quite a lot of work in Qatar in the lead up to the World Cup. And it's amazing. Honestly, it was the first time, I guess it must have been 2018, maybe 2019. It's the first time where I'd honestly seen Qataris not just talk about sport, actually play sport. After the workshops, I would go down and we'd all get changed and we'd play some paddle on these amazing courts in Qatar. And so it's been on my radar personally for some time. Obviously, I got the bug and I'm totally addicted. In terms of programming, it is a different thing. We have lots of platforms. We have lots of different content products. Absolutely, we include paddle on many of those, and we have done already. When it comes to our flagship Leaders Week and the Leaders Sport Business Summit, which you alluded to in London, it's the thing that everyone wants to be at, and it's the thing that we spend most of our time and energy programming. And honestly, it's a bit of an art and a science, programming an event, the scale of that. And you're going to disappoint a lot more people than you please, I think, in the programming of it. Because there are so many people who come and there are only so many speaking slots. There are only so many spots on stage that we can do. And what we're trying to do in general, ultimately, is cater for our audience. And our audience is senior sports industry, media and entertainment executives across lots of different kind of verticals within that. They're influential people who make decisions in sports and entertainment. So we're trying to do 4 or 5 things with the programming. We're trying to cover the biggest trends in any given year. So that might be this year, for example, AI, new types of brand sponsorship category, different types of business model, new ownership money, influencer marketing, athletes as brands and athletes as media entities. Those are trends that we're trying to. Second thing that we're trying to throw in the mix is we want to have the biggest organizations represented, the Premier League, the IOC, the NFL, the NBA, etc. So leagues, federations, teams, brands, and broadcasters, we need biggest, most powerful, richest, most influential ones. The biggest names, that's the third thing that we're throwing into the programming mix. So the biggest individual speaker names. Usually there's a lot of football involved in there. It really does cut through. Football owners, CEOs, brand CMOs, talent athletes, and then the odd kind of celebrity administrator. And there aren't many of them, but people like Seb Coe, Casey Wasserman, Ari Emanuel, that kind of figure. And then the final thing we're doing is to ensure that program has good balance and representation. It's really important to us. We have a commitment not to program all male panels, for example, and across all of our programming. So when it's all said and done, we've got 3 stages of content at our event in London. Those 3 stages probably have 40-something sessions across 2 days, and we're trying to fit a lot into a little, basically. So if you're only ticking one of those boxes, and I would argue that at present, for us, paddle and the wider paddle ecosystem and where paddle is as a kind of business proposition, the different entities within paddle, that absolutely ticks a trend. That is definitely a trend. You know, the kind of explosion of paddle and the establishment of paddle as a coherent sports business ecosystem with strategic vision and a roadmap to growth. and cultural impact. That's a trend, but I'm not sure that it ticks any of the other boxes. So we do have a space to try to program paddle stuff. And we are actively trying to program some paddle content onto our agenda this year. But it fits into a niche for us, but just one niche. There's only one way, right? It's only going to grow. It's only going to become more established. It's only going to suck in more people to the ecosystem. It's only going to have more influential voices. We will get there in terms of it ticking some of those other boxes for us.
True. What about celebrity endorsers, whether it's David Beckham or Jimmy Butler from Miami Heat or the Formula One drivers? These are people who I think fit one of your pillars in terms of celebrity, or even in some of the cases, celebrity owners or administrators. I think Jimmy Butler has got involvement in the Reserve Cup, which is an event in Miami at the beginning of the year. Do you see an opportunity where paddle can try and leverage those individuals? It could be part of a broader discussion about celebrities and how they spend their money or their investments in other areas beyond what you would traditionally think of.
Totally. And our door is very much always open to that kind of speaker. And actually, there are other sports that have really leaned into this trend for athletes to not just be endorsers of a brand or a sport or whatever, but to take an ownership stake, whatever kind of financial dynamic that takes. And the reason that it's useful is, stating the obvious, to have someone like David Beckham on a program for us, it's like an immediate bit of stardust. But it's also really useful as a foot in the door for an opportunity for us to have a packed out room, listening to Beckham talking about his business investments into 3 or 4 things and why he does them. That's a thing that we immediately know is going to be compelling for a huge audience and we would want to do. And paddle gets a quarter of that conversation. And if someone like Beckham is on the table, he's going to get a slot on the headline stage. Like, there's no real question.
Yeah, but there's a few like that. There's Andy Murray as well, Robert Lewandowski, Eva Longoria. Those 3 names alone, they all invested in the Hexagon Cup. So
my experience is that celebrity investors, athlete investors, the dynamic that they have is they're billed as investors, but really is a type of endorsement. They commit to lending their name and probably a certain number of appearances across a given year. And so whoever's kind of strategically in charge of how to deploy them has to think very carefully about how to use them and get their buy-in. Eva Longoria might have, 2 days that she appears at a paddle competition and she's going to do one other thing. You have to think very judiciously about how you're going to use her time, because otherwise it's just a more traditional kind of brand-athlete relationship and she's going to charge for it. Right? That's my experience anyway. You do get the rare occasions where people are really bought in, they're properly invested. We had Thierry Henry speak years ago at Leaders because he was genuinely financially invested into a company and wanted to come and speak on their behalf. But my experience is that's unusual.
Yeah, I think to your point, James, I think there is this very thin line between those athletes who are jumping on a hype train because it's a hype train versus those athletes who are jumping on a hype train because it's actually something that they are super passionate about. And actually they play it a lot or they follow it a lot. You had Rick Fox, who was the ex-basketball player who bought into Echo Fox, which is a League of Legends team in esports. He was passionate about it because him and his son spent a lot of time. That's how they bonded, was over League of Legends. Then they went to events and bonded over going to League of Legends. And so it was a real, how do I call it, an investment in every sense of the word. I think with Eva Longoria and paddle, it's the same thing. There is a lot of stories about her just playing paddle all the time. And so I think she is really passionate about the sport and helping the sport grow. And she came to Madrid for the Hexagon Cup finals and was there for like 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like she was just meeting obligations and clock watching.
Well, I think if that's the case, then top tip for anyone involved in paddle or any sport that has this layer of kind of stardust investors, people who have bought in and pushing the sport forward. If you value representation events like ours at Leaders, where you want to be at the forefront of an industry conversation, you want to be putting yourself forward for the kind of opportunity that comes your way if you are on stage at Leaders, put your best forward and lead with your most recognizable spokespeople. And in the case of Padel right now, that would be the likes of people on Joria.
So we've made a basic assumption, which I make, and I know that you make, but I think it's worth spelling out for the audience is, what is the benefit actually for Padel or Padel representatives or stakeholders to speak on these panel sessions and in front of these audiences? It's time, it's travel. For some of them, it's not their first language, maybe. What's the benefit for them to be there on the stage? And even if they're not on the stage, and even if Padel's not on the stage, what's the benefit for them to just be at Leaders? In the first section of this episode, we talked about the endemic space where you're doing deals with like-minded people. You know, you're a court manufacturer, they're a club builder. You're going to do a deal because it's obvious, you know, you offer a service that they want. And that happens organically, as it should do at these gatherings. Here, it feels like there's perhaps a greater degree of separation, or it's different industries, different sectors, different size. What is Padel going to learn from the NFL? What is the NFL going to learn from Padel? Is there too much distance between those businesses and where they are, and those sports and where they are? I'm a big believer that Padel should be trying to get to those things, should try and break out of its endemic space. I don't want to call it a bubble or a silo, but I want it to spread the word, because I think there is a word to be spread. From your point of view as the organizer, what do you see as a benefit for a Padel person to be on that agenda and be on that stage? And what is the benefit for a Padel person to be in the room and to go to those networking events and to sit in the audience?
Yeah, well, I can certainly give you what I think. So for a delegate and for a speaker, they're slightly different, but obviously there is some crossover. So as a delegate, I would suggest that going to industry events in general, but especially going to an event like Leaders, which of course I'm contractually obliged to say is the biggest, best, and most influential, it's basically learning, relationships, and opportunities. Those are the three big things. You can sort of assign different values to those different buckets. Learning, whatever you see on stage, whatever you talk about on the floor, we can guarantee you that there will be a handful of significant learnings, actionable things that you're able to take away to make your life easier, more efficient, more lucrative, whatever, when you go back home to your day job. And that is built on years of experience and kind of forensic focus on tailoring both the content and the audience to the people that are coming. You will guaranteed learn stuff that will make your life easier when you come to Leaders. Relationships, I mean, it's the who's who of the sports, entertainment, and media industries that sure, some people are less willing to kind of jump into networking as others, but we try to make it as comfortable for everyone as we can. We're working really hard to make it a welcoming and accessible environment to all sorts of different types of people, different groups of people. You can, going to Leaders, build and nurture, massage a network that would take you an entire year to develop if you're just doing it by yourself. You weren't going to this sort of honey of an event. Honestly, it's the who's who that are there. Everyone is on board with the idea that everyone else is there to build, develop, nurture relationships. So everybody wants the same thing. It's a good, positive environment for developing relationships. And do you know what's really important? You know, it's a fundamental, I think, for how business works, really, for how life works, really. Opportunity, whatever you do in a particular, whatever your role is, we ensure that the audience mix there is nicely balanced between what we define as buyers and sellers, meaning that whatever your particular position is, whether you are buying or selling, whatever you're doing, you will have the opportunity to meet people who could become clients. There is the opportunity to do deals. Leaders, some of the most significant deals in sporting recent history start or even are completed Leaders. Like it is a crucible for deal making as well. So that's reasons to attend. Reasons to speak, obviously all of the above. But it's got a certain status, hasn't it, Leaders? I mean, it's in the name, isn't it? It is the forum for the most influential discussion in sport. And these are people who are going to make fundamental decisions about governance, structure, commercialization, employment, opportunity. And if you're on the same stage as these people, you're part of that conversation and you are influential. So it's partly in a kind of a status thing. It's partly in what you say. There's 3,000 people there and a couple of hundred media representatives. Whatever you say is heard and understood by a range of stakeholders and amplified far beyond walls of conference hall. Yeah, I guess those are the main ones.
I think it's probably fair to say Leaders is an event that's focused at the professional sports sector or pillar. But the reality is that actually there are equivalents that are in, for example, the performance sector. And I know Leaders has its own performance pillar as well for those people who are like coaches, analysts, therapists, who are much more focused on the nuts and bolts of improving the performance of athletes on and off playing field. So for those people who are listening, who are thinking this is only really applicable to rights holders at the top tier of a sport, and therefore I don't need to pay attention because I'm a court builder or a club builder or a coach or an academy or whatever. The truth be told, that in each of those pillars, there are definitely those non-endemic sports industry-wide events and gatherings and summits and trade shows, where again, it's pretty much the same value and the same benefits for paddle to break out of its endemic space and try and spread the learning and the understanding in those other more broader forums. So even though we focused with you, James, on the Leaders Summit that focuses on rights holders at the pro level, everything we're talking about pretty much applies for every sector of the paddle industry as it exists today.
Yeah, I mean,
it may not necessarily be Leaders, it may be a difference.
Well, if you're a court builder in paddle, we would need to talk to you about a sponsorship opportunity, to be honest, because the amount of business that you could pick up at Leaders. Honestly, I talk to chief executives, chief operating officers, all sorts of rights holders, big and small, on a regular basis. Almost all of them are either in the midst of or considering infrastructural redevelopment projects. If you are redeveloping sporting infrastructure, you are thinking about what facilities should I include in there? Is paddle something that I might consider? And nobody's got any expertise on that. And so if you are a paddle court builder, you are rubbing your hands.
Well, listen, James, I think we'll probably end it. I really appreciate your time and your input. I thought it was really important for our audience to look behind the curtain and understand how to break through into those agendas, the whys as well as the hows. And I think this has been really helpful because we want to look at the endemic space and that development in the endemic event space, but also I thought it was really important for the sake of balance and zooming out to look at, actually, we should not just be thinking about endemic platforms and spaces, but also non-endemic. So I think this has been really useful.
I think both are really important. Like I wouldn't say one over the other. It's really important to have your own endemic space where you are covering the whole ecosystem. And especially for a sport like paddle, which is in its infancy, right, in terms of its professional development, it is really important to establish, probably still going through a painful process of establishing a pecking order. And that needs to happen before the rest of tangential sports, media, entertainment industries can understand what's going on with you and can understand who the best person to speak to is on any given topic. It's happening in esports as well, which I know you know very well, but there needs to be these focused endemic forums that iron things out, as well as the kind of more broad looking, let's position ourselves in a wider ecosystem and get outside interest in.
100%. So anyway, again, please like, share and subscribe if the content was thought-provoking. Please comment on LinkedIn or Twitter if you've got any recommendations around the format, topics, guests, questions. We obviously want to make sure that whatever we're putting in front of you as our audience is relevant to the industry that you guys are building. We'll keep doing our best to cover all the angles of the business around paddle, episode after episode. Until the next one, take care.